Hello, and welcome to this evening's reading with Rebecca McClanahan. I'm Elizabeth Dark, Associate Director of Programs for the Kenyon Review, and I'm being joined on screen now by Anna Duke-Reach, our Director of Programs, and Rebecca, our guest for the evening. In a moment, Anna will introduce Rebecca, but first let me walk you through the evening just a bit. If you'd like closed captioning, you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please email us at kenyonreview@kenyon.edu, which I'm actually going to put in the chat real quick. Our staff member, Tori Weber, is waiting there to help you. We'll also be keeping the chat open should you wish to extend a hello or offer positive comments throughout the evening. And finally, as a question comes to you, please submit it using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. After Rebecca's reading, we will have a Q&A time. And on your behalf, I will be asking the questions that you submit in this way. But at this time, I will pass it over to Anna Duke-Reach to introduce Rebecca, and I will disappear.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Duke-Reach, Director of Programs at the Kenyon Review, and it's my privilege to introduce my dear friend, Rebecca McClanahan, tonight. She is the rare writer who can write proficiently in both poetry and prose, as proven by her many accolades. She's written 10 books, received 4 fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts and the North Carolina Arts Council, as well as 2 Pushcart Prizes, the Glasgow Award in Nonfiction, and the Wood Prize from Poetry Magazine. Rebecca's work has appeared in the Best American Essays, Best American Poetry, the Georgia Review, our own Kenyon Review, The Sun, and numerous anthologies. She teaches in the MFA program of Queen's University and the Rainier Writing Workshops, as well as Kenyon Review's summer writing workshops. Rebecca lives in Charlotte, North Carolina with her husband Don Devitt, a video producer. The only thing she loves almost as much as her husband is the 20 sapphire hardbound volumes of the Oxford English Dictionary that Don gave her on an odometer birthday to honor her love of etymology. Tonight, we'll hear Rebecca read from her most recent book, In the Key of New York City, a memoir and essays. These pages chronicle her midlife move to Midtown, New York, where Rebecca tracks the heartbeat of the city as a keenly observant newcomer. She captures the joys and sorrows of humanity in overheard conversations on park benches, songs and cries sifted through apartment walls, and encounters with street people dispensing unexpected wisdom. The 9/11 attacks and a serious cancer surgery complicate this story, merging public with private and the present with the past. As one reviewer wrote, this book offers a timeless portrait of New York's contradictions. It provides a salve to the upheaval of now and acts as a reminder of the city's constancy through tribulations. Amy Wright noted in the Kenyon Review that this memoir is a homecoming hymn for a home that is always changing. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca to this virtual podium.
There. Now can you hear me? Yes, okay. Well, thank you, Anna and Elizabeth and all of the Kenyon Review staff, present and past. The Kenyon Review has been a wonderful home to me, to my work through decades, and also the Writers' Workshop in the summer that I am so fortunate to be part of. And so thank you and so much. And thank you, all of you, for being here. You know, I know you're out there, even though I can't really hear you or see you yet. But I know you're out there in this vast and very changing world that is changing faster than we ever thought it would, right? So, you know, the Mars rover has been out there now on Mars for about a month. And I have just been thinking so much about it because it seems like we're all kind of on this rover together in this vast uncharted space and time. All of us kind of in this cosmic rover together. And I think it's supposed to stay there about 1 year, roving around, gathering information about microbial life and these things I don't understand. But the weird thing is, I guess 1 year on Mars is equal 2 years on Earth, which I don't really get, but kind of works perfectly for what we're going through, I think, because it does feel that way. But I think the best thing is the name. It's called Perseverance. And I said, what a perfect, perfect name for something that we are all going through. So maybe we'll just hang on a while longer, and we'll be able to meet in person. So yeah, it's really hard to choose excerpts from a whole book, even though it's memoir and essays. There are 18 basic sections in the book, and there are various lengths. Some of them are as short as they're flash pieces, so they're a page or 2 pages, but some of them are 25 pages. And I decided today that I would just read a few brief pieces, and they're just like segments from different pieces, but I chose all pieces that were in essays that were in the Kenyon Review. There were 3 long ones that were in the Kenyon Review, but I took liberties with them once they were published and changed them around quite a bit so that the book would have a particular shape. But I think you'll get the sense of some of what's going on here. So the only piece that I will not read, that I will read that was not in the Kenyon Review is one that Anna requested. And so I will do that short one. So this is the very shortest one in the book, and it's called 8th Avenue Moment. A young man stumbles toward me, something dark and feathered bundled in his arms. He looks up, red eyes, distillery breath. You know anything about pigeons? No, I say. I love animals, he says, the ones on the farm when I was young. He holds the pigeon out to me. What's wrong with him? Looks like he's dying, I say. Why? Things die, I say. I'm sorry. I love animals, he says. I'm sorry. I love you too, he says. It's a lot of surprises, of things that people said when I just sat down and listened to them, or stopped for a moment and listened to them. Actually, I know quite a bit about pigeons because I learned things because in our new sublet apartment, Anna didn't give all the dark and dirty stuff about the move. It was yes, it was midlife. It was a leap into the unknown. Talk about perseverance in the Land Rover. And we just decided, my husband and I, Donald and I just decided on his 50th birthday that we were going to do something we'd been talking about for decades, which was move to New York. So to do that, we uprooted our lives. We sold our house, we left our jobs. We had enough money, we figured, to last 2 years if we did not find work. We ended up staying for 11, but and things did work out. But boy, it was a really difficult first few years. We did find a furnished sublet since we left all our things pretty much behind. So there's a lot about loneliness and homesickness and adjustments to a new place that are in the beginning of the book, especially. And this surprised me a bit because I'd moved so often, as a military brat growing up in a family that moved quite a bit. I thought I was pretty good at finding the lay of the land, just, sussing out what we should be doing here. How do you talk? How do you dress? How do you fit in? Being a newcomer. But for some reason, making a home and a community in New York was very different. And some of the crazy things I did to try to ingratiate myself to neighbors so that they would be part of my life are in the book. And there's a lot about that loneliness. And but after a while, we did indeed make a community and connected, found jobs. So this is coming, oh gosh, about a third into the piece. This is actually in one of the 9/11 essays that was published in the Kenyon review. One of the reasons we wanted to move was to be in a city where so many people came from somewhere else, where there were people that were so different from us, and where we could not just drive through places and neighborhoods, where we had to walk and be present and be in the middle of all of this. So in a way, you know, we were newcomers and immigrants too. This section also mentions the light, which is what I missed, I think, more than almost anything, because we had a very dark apartment with only about an hour a day of light. When the first signs of light appear, I get up from my writing desk and move to the green rug. I lie down on my back, kick off my shoes, let the brightness pour over my face, my feet. Some days I think of my family and friends in North Carolina, the house we sold so that we could afford this furnished sublet here, the 100-year-old oaks that shaded our yard, the lost garden and its changing light. But most days now, I just say thank you to no one in particular for this city, for the miracle of millions of toilets flushing all at once, for cheap, abundant flowers and unidentifiable produce on street corners, for the rich broth of languages I hear on my walks, for the public library where the checkout clerk stands on a stool, a woman with thalidomide sprouts for arms and a scar down the side of her face, who stamps whatever book I bring to her without asking any questions. New York is a great place to be noticed or not to be noticed, to find yourself or to lose yourself, depending on what you need. But now a horn is blaring down on the street and other horns are joining in. What is it this time? I go to the window to investigate. A fancy sedan is stopped in the middle of the street, sideways, blocking the yellow cab behind it. A tall, well-dressed woman gets out of the sedan and marches over to the cab. She's fuming, screaming at the cab driver that she's just trying to park her car, but he won't give her an inch. And how is she supposed to back into the space with him right there behind her, blasting his horn? The cab driver, who looks Middle Eastern, jumps out of the cab and stands nose to nose with the woman, shouting something I can't make out. I'm thinking it might come to physical blows. Then she screams, "Go back where you came from." And someone on the sidewalk below my window, I can't see who it is, applauds. Go back where you came from? What would that mean for New York? I imagine the streets emptying like they do when you show a film in reverse, time sucking us backwards, the sky filling with bodies, all of us hurtling back to where we came from. The cab driver back to Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, the super and his wife and children linked in a chain of hands, flying out of their basement apartment and into the air above the Atlantic, heading toward Montenegro. The ashes of Donald's grandparents reconstructing into bones, skin, cells, then swirling back to Chicago, Canada, Switzerland, and finally into a small village outside St. Petersburg. All of us disappearing, even me, sucked through the streets of New York and down to North Carolina, then South Carolina, to Maryland, California, then back into Virginia, Texas, Illinois, finally landing in Indiana, in the nursery of a small hospital in Tippecanoe County, my thumb in my mouth, and still the film keeps running backwards, 100 years, another 100 years, another. Where are they now? The streets of New York, the town of the past, the land where things disappear. No more. All that's left is forest, river, sky, and a few hundred gray squirrels high in the trees, building their lopsided nests. Unfortunately, I think we're still hearing that phrase a lot. Some things are slow in coming. So yeah, there's a lot of things about being of the internal life of being in this apartment, and the name of the book is In the Key of New York City. So music is threaded throughout. Almost every single piece has some kind of reference to music. Beautiful music, music that you might not want to hear, even the internal music of listening almost like with a stethoscope to hear my neighbors who are opera singers and to guess their lives. So this has a bit of music in it as well. And also a bit about the subway. And there are lots of other places in the book, but this is about Central Park, which is a very, very important part of the book and was an important part of my life. Here's a short piece about that. Across the park, in this city that never sleeps, everyone, it seems, does. Sometimes in late morning, I walk to my favorite bench in Sheep Meadow and wait for the sleepers to wake. Now, scanning the lawn before me, I see the muscled torso of a man curling around a ginkgo trunk as if he were growing out of it. 2 orange crutches and a guitar are carefully placed beside him, and beside the guitar, 2 artificial legs tapering to stumps below the knee joints. The way we take off our shoes to sleep, he has taken off his legs. Watching this sleeping man, I keep thinking of the man on the subway, the tall, beautiful, copper-colored man I once stumbled awkwardly into when the train took its squealing, violent turn right before South Ferry. So sorry, I said, forgive me. The man nodded, but never looked down. He remained upright, strongly positioned, his face like a carving on some ancient coin. When he spoke, each word was perfectly calibrated, clear, calm as a still lake. Let Calgon be Calgon. I blinked and forced myself to look away from his beauty. Another crazy, I figured. Lord, they're everywhere. The woman preaching at me through a restroom door, holding the Holy Bible above the stall with huge Moses hands. The pregnant girl screeching like a wild bird in the lobby of Grand Central, then screaming to everyone in hearing distance, that would have been all of Manhattan, that she needed money for insurance because her husband was, quote, emotionally unavailable. I grabbed for the subway strap and recovered my balance, looking again at the beautiful man. He was still beautiful, still calm, and I suddenly realized absolutely sane. My mother used to sprinkle Calgon into the laundry to soften our clothes and into the bathtub to soften her dirt-crusted, callous-footed children. Let Calgon be Calgon, his private mantra generously shared with me, a Zen koan that made so much sense it didn't need to make any. Calgon, a long ago used up word, rescued from the tossed out bin of my childhood. Yes, I thought, let Calgon be Calgon. Let it soften the hearts of all us callous children, grown now, up and away from the lives our parents jump-started all those years ago. Suddenly, I'm very sleepy, the best kind of sleepy. I want to curl up like the legless man before me, surrounded by bird squawk and squirrel chatter, the way I used to curl up in the middle of the grown-ups' talk. My uncle shuffling the cards, my aunt stalled in the middle of a story with no point except its telling, my mother's conspiratorial laughter. Pretending sleep willing my arm to flop dramatically onto the sofa so that they would let me stay right there, part of the scene, but even more so, lone sleeper in the midst of all that song. I would like to fall asleep right now on this bench, waking to the snap of the plastic legs socketing the man back together, and in a few minutes, the strum of his guitar. Okay, Anna, I'm going to read the other subway piece. The other thing I've thought about so much over the past year is all of the invisible hands it takes to just get us all through our day. Of course, we call them essential workers, but they're mostly invisible. Even though this experience on the Downtown 1 train happened many years ago, I think there are some similarities. I know there are because I see them still. Early morning Downtown 1 train. In this car packed with closed faces, this tube of light tunneling through darkness, 2 sleeping boys, so close I could touch them without reaching, their smooth brown faces, planed cheekbones like Peruvian steps leading from or to some beautiful ruin. Boys so alike, they must be brothers. And the small, worried man they sprawl against, too young to seem so old, father. How far have they come? How far to go? They sleep as only loved children sleep, wholly, no need to tighten or clutch to fold themselves in. Their heads are thrown back, mouths open, no, agape, which looks like the word agape, the highest form of love, some minister told me long ago. As if love is a cupboard of lower and higher shelves, and why bother reaching if you have hands like the hands of this young father, cracked and blistered, stamped with the pattern of shovel or pick. For someone must do our digging and rise in the dark to dress the children carefully as these boys are dressed, and pack their knapsacks and ease out of the seat without waking the open-mouthed younger one, nor the older whose head now rests fully on the empty seat. But my God, I am thinking, as the brakes squeal and the father moves quickly to face the door. He is leaving these children. A father is leaving his children. The train slows at 50th, and he presses his body against the door, lifting his arms above his head. A signal? Surrender? As the door slides open and a woman steps in, small and dark like the father, her body lost in a white uniform. She touches his sleeve, something passes between their eyes. Not sadness exactly, but ragged exhaustion, frayed edges meeting, his night, her day, her night, his day, goodbye, hello. She slides onto the seat, lifting one son's head to her lap. His mouth is still open, his body limp. She smooths his collar, her small hands move to his lips, closing them gently, the way one closes the mouth of the recently dead. But the boy is not dead, just sleeping, an arm thrown over his brother, his mother near. I think one of the things for writers about being a newcomer is it's a wonderful stance from which to write. I mean, we're all newcomers every day in one way or another, but I think in particular, when you go to a new place, your feelers are up, you notice things very, at least I did, more intensely than I think I would have if I'd been a native New Yorker. I'm going to end with a short piece about recovery, back to the Mars rover and the new world that we're hoping to enter. And I say new world, not the old world. I don't believe we'll ever recover it. And I write a bit about recovery and how I don't believe it's I'm not fond of the word, nor am I fond of closure. Because I think that once you've been through any sort of big change, like we're going through in trauma, you are so changed that the new place that you enter will never be the same because you will be changed. Anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking with it. But this is a piece that happens I think about a week after the attacks. I don't talk about the attacks directly, but this is the aftermath. It happened about a week afterwards, and it was we had some close friends, several that we made, but some that we reconnected with. And this was a younger couple, younger than us, that had a little girl. She was about 18 months old when the attacks happened, and the parents let me borrow her quite often, especially when they felt like that I really needed a child around, because I had left nephews and nieces and children that I worked with in the classroom and that sort of thing. So this is a day when my friend Rob came in his New York Yankees cap and arrived at the door with a stroller, and he says, "We're going to the park," because he knew how I loved it. At that point, anti-Muslim sentiment and suspicion was already growing in different places throughout the US. And I guess that's all you need to know. Oh, and balloons. A popped balloon can be a very, very dangerous thing to a child, just so you know, in case you haven't encountered that. I hope you haven't, but read about it. So here's the very last couple pages here. We entered the park near the South Pond. The day was excruciatingly beautiful. It didn't seem right, it didn't seem just for the weather to be so perfect. The park wasn't as crowded as usual, but those who were out were really out. Professional dog walkers with their fanny pouches and tangled leashes, women jogging with strollers, some with postpartum bellies displayed between halter tops and shorts, serious athletes running 2 by 2, strutting their pecs, abs, delts, all those shortcut terms, moving as if there were mirrors all around them. Their vanity cheered me, as did the balloon hat on the juggler outside the Central Park Zoo. I thought of the John Lahr quote, "Frivolity is the species' refusal to suffer." Our destination was the adventure playground. As we approached, the first thing I saw was a small American flag. I'd never noticed a flag before. Had it been there always? It stood at the edge of the sand pile and was lowered to half-staff, the children playing noisily around it. Rob was the only man present. One woman wore a headscarf and loose trousers. She was watching a small blonde boy who was digging with a shovel in the sand. I sat on the bench and pulled Marcella onto my lap, turning her to face the other children. Her head was sweaty, her brown hair curling at the nape of her neck. I breathed in her scent. Several children were now at the sand pile, playing beneath the flag. The blonde boy was intent on his digging. As he dug, he held up each treasure for the woman to see: a leaf, another leaf, a twig, and what was that bright red thing? A balloon? Yes, the scrap of a balloon. He held it out proudly, and as he brought it to his mouth, I started to call out to Rob, but no need, for suddenly the woman was there. The moment opened in slow motion, miniaturized beauty, a flag flying at half-staff, a pile of sand, and a woman in a headscarf running her heart out to reach a blonde boy. Marcella's head began to bob in rhythm. She wanted a song. Her hands were busy, her fingers weaving, wiggling. She wanted the spider song, starring the itsy bitsy hero who won't take rain, won't take no for an answer. I placed my hand in front of her to show her how to make him climb up, up, up. I hadn't sung in a long time, and my voice was rusty, but her bobbing head told me she needed the words. So the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. Thank you so much for your attention. and for being here tonight.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
That was just beautiful. And you know, I kept thinking as you were reading, specifically your descriptions, something that we have missed this past year is the opportunity to witness people that just kind of come across our paths, you know, like body language. And yeah, we've been able to select who we see. And, you know, we've been able to watch people on screens and whatnot, but so many of your pieces are you just walking along and coming across strangers and reminding me how much I need to come across strangers that I wouldn't place in front of me, you know, in some sort of a Zoom situation or whatnot. I will remind the audience that you can put questions in the Q&A section, but I'm going to start with mine to begin with. Rebecca, you've written poetry and prose, and specifically within nonfiction, you've done lyric essays and you've done personal memoir. You've done really helpful craft books. And I've gotten to know you personally through your role as a workshop instructor here during the summers. But I actually have no idea how you came to the decision to become a writer. What's that story, and how did you decide to pursue this living?
Well, I'd always made up stories and songs. I really loved music more. In fact, that was my first major. I don't think I ever really thought about being anything. I was so interested in so many different things and changed majors maybe 3 or 4 times. But I had always made up songs, even as a child. And we had a bunch of kids in the house, and usually one bathroom, one bathtub. And I remember making up songs in the bathtub from age like 7 or 8, and then sometimes writing them down. I ran across something cleaning out a bunch of old things, and I thought, oh, I'm going to put this up to cheer me when I get discouraged about my writing. And it was a little book I'd put together in, I think, about 2nd grade, and it had like 4 pages. And the title was A Good Book. And I thought, oh gosh, I was even writing my own reviews. And then at the very back, it said, goodbye book, and it had someone crying at the end. So I guess I was always very interested in it. I read everything I could get my hands on. We had an ancient great aunt that lived with us, and I often she would stay with us at various times throughout our childhood. And I shared a room with her quite often and a bed, and she was an amazing reader. And so she really got me started with reading. But, you know, I wrote, I finagled my way onto the literary magazine staff as a high schooler. And I've looked back recently at those, and they're definitely going to be burned. They just are so awful compared to what everyone else was writing at the time. So I think I just started writing and poems, and I probably didn't send them out. I wrote for about 10 years before I sent anything out. Seriously, I think I was afraid of it. So then, you know, I don't know. Other than that, you know, Sal Bellow wrote that a writer is a reader moved to emulation. And I think that I just, I wanted to do what they were doing. I wanted to be able to create worlds that I could live in, at least myself, and maybe someone else would want to come in and live. That's the best I can say. Plus, I just love words, you know, so much. And they're just exciting to take them apart, to look at them, to see which ones match others, that talk back to each other. And then once I discovered the power of the writing process itself, that you don't have to know anything. You don't have to really be writing about anything important. It will present itself as you write. And then you can do the research or whatever you need to try to live up to that discovery process. And that's just a wonderful place to be. So I think that's really what started it. I don't know if that's a very good answer. But
Great answer. Thank you. Anna, do you have a question?
I do. Rebecca, you once wrote that sometimes to get at the truth, you must poke it with something sharp, a stick, a memory. And I'm curious how you use your sharp stick to build a bridge from memory to memoir. Are you a journalist and then you work on things, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I do keep a writer's notebook, and it's not just it's not so much a journal as things that have happened. I did keep a bunch of them that I used for the book, and the book actually moves pretty much chronologically through the first several years that we were there, and I kept a lot of notes of things. Conversations and descriptions of places and that sort of thing. But I also, in the writer's notebook, react to things I'm reading, to questions that I wonder about. So it's not just events that happen, in other words, or feelings that I feel like I need to write down so that I don't scream or strangle someone. But yeah, I think, that poke a memory, because we always say getting at the truth. Let's get at the truth. And I think that's what I was working with. Again, the language led me to that understanding. When I said getting at the truth, I go, what? What does that even mean? So how do you get at it? And then I think it has to get to you in some way. And again, I think it's through the process of memory. But as far as the kind of writer I am, rather slow. I write a lot before I even begin to see that there might be something happening, some sort of, two sticks are rubbing together. We've got a little bit of a fire here. What's happening here? And once I see that, or a vibration, or a magnetic center coming in at some point, and then I usually cut away everything that went before that, and get started with that. Sometimes it's a memory. Quite often, in the middle of writing about a present tense event or something very, very recent, the memory pulls up. It comes up. And there's an essay in the book called Present Tense. And it's about wondering why, when I thought New York would be such a present tense place, with that all it's in your face all the time, it seemed like that the past came up more than it ever had before for me in that place. And I don't really understand why that was. But so the surprise of life. But no, I'm not an efficient writer at all. And I often cut many parts before sometimes I will whittle down a 25-page essay to 4 pages. Other times I might write several, and I think they're failed, and they're failed, and they're failed, and I put them away, and then I pull them out again. I go, oh, they weren't failed. They just hadn't found their partner. And these 4 that I thought were failed actually fit together. Let me see how I can work these like a puzzle and see if they can go together. I love to revise. I just find it so exciting. So to see what you might come up with,
I have a question from Teresa, and I'll prep you. This is about the auditory piece of your writing. It is clear that sound really draws your attention, whether it's the sound of speech or music. How do you think about the sound of your writing? And on a somewhat separate note, what appeals to you about writing prose over poetry, which is a medium more traditionally associated with an auditory experience?
Yeah, well, it is perhaps more auditory. Yeah, I mean, the sounds of language, the way I talk about it with my students is that the sounds, that is, and that's the sentence rhythms, whether you have, you know, a long loopy sentence with many repetitions, or a 3-word sentence popped in here and here. It's all about rhythm, even in prose. But it's also, I think it's like invisible sometimes, like a soundtrack in a good movie. I'm not talking about one where you can recognize the songs like Big Chill or something like that, but in a really good movie, you are so moved. Often a good soundtrack, you don't really realize it, but what that is adding so much. And so I think about sentences and language, and even, you know, vowel sounds, that certain ones are like playing a different instrument. And yeah, I taught poetry in the schools for 15 years to K through 12. And one of their favorite ones, well, they loved that silly John Updike poem about the tuba, you know, but he makes it, you know, Eskimos in Manitoba, Barracuda, off Aruba, Cockaneer, you know, and it goes, it's like a tuba. It's very funny. And then they loved Carl Sandburg's Jazz Fantasia, you know, drum on your drums, batter on your banjos. So we talked about that, like what sentence would be similar to, say, a piccolo playing, what letters would go, and they always knew it'd be a high, like an I, like a short I, and so I think that these things are very natural to us. As to the question, Therese, I think there's a question better there about maybe the difference auditorially between the two. I don't think I make a big distinction about that. I think some of my prose pieces are voice propelled. I mean, they are sound propelled. Others are more character driven. But I think that the role of language as kind of that soundtrack is always something that, if it doesn't work at the beginning in a piece, it's usually not going to ever work. It's a hard thing to go back in and not fix, but change, because it's kind of part of the original impulse for particular pieces. But yeah, but I'm not sure. I mean, we have the prose poem, and then we have the lyric essay, and they touch. So sometimes I'm not sure. Actually, that the subway poem about the 2 boys had originally been published as a poem. And when I put it in the book, I dismantled the line breaks because I just knew that it was an essential one for the book. And so, poetry, prose. They're all factual. But
along that, you mentioned early, when you were determining to become a writer, as you were evolving into a writer, you wanted to emulate people you had been reading. So within the areas of poetry and prose, who were some of the people that you were wanting to emulate early?
Oh my gosh, from the beginning? Well, Hopkins was very important to me quite early on, because he was the first poet that I didn't understand what was happening, you know, just through my brain. It was like I was taking it in with my body, you know. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose mosel. And I memorize poems. That's one of my hobbies. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, and Blake, I love The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. I you know, all the strangeness of that. Theodore Rutke, for many of the same reasons. You know, of course, Dylan Thomas, even the prose, Child's Christmas in Wales, Cummings, Blake, and now I studied with Audre Lorde. You know, Robert Hayden, Ammons. I got studied with A.R. Ammons and loved him. Stanley Kunitz, I was fabulous early on. Jack Gilbert, Stanley Plumley, our own David Baker. You know, Jane Kenyon, Yusuf Komunyakaa, so many. I mean, I just read all the time. It's also a great way to avoid writing, you know. You do know that, right? You're a writer, you know. And yeah, and recently in the last year or two, I've just been focusing on reading nonfiction mostly. I mean, I still read poems every day, but I'm talking about as far as the books. I was getting out a list yesterday because someone said, well, what books have you gotten this year? I go, oh my gosh, what I've been reading new ones. And the last thing I've been reading was the new Claudia Rankine's new piece, Just Us, which is a hybrid, a very interesting form that she's using. And of course, cast, Isabel Wilkerson. I've been teaching her first book, Warmth of Other Suns, for years. And just some of them I've just ordered. I love Ross Gay's The Book of Delights. I just think he's wonderful. But so many others, Wendy Willis, Sue Silverman, Sejal Shah, Leah Purpura, her new book. So, you know, there's just so many. I don't know. I mean, you know, who knows what my earliest things were. But for me, as very, very young, it was the King James Bible. I absolutely loved it. I memorized, I know it sounds so goofy, I'm such a nerd, but I memorized like whole chapters. I mean, 1 Corinthians 13, you just don't get more beautiful prose than that, you know, love suffereth long and is kind, love envieth not. So I really, really was influenced by the rhythms of the King James Bible. I don't like any of those other translations. Not in my world. But no, I'm sure there are other ones. So I think it went way back into music, and all of those things kind of merge. But I like to read.
Rebecca, you clearly have such respect for perseverance, or Percy on Mars. And I wonder, and I know that your books have taken you years to put together, especially Tribal Knot and now this one. I'm wondering what encouragement you can offer to writers about continuing to work on their projects over long swaths of time. And then one participant was asking what your next project is. So if I could fold that into, you know, how you endure and how you are going forward.
Yeah, well, it ain't a horse race, thank God. But I don't know. It's more like if I go very long without persevering and writing, I'm not happy. I want to be participating in the process, doing something. This year has been extremely hard for many, many reasons that everyone has shared, and some other of things that, you know, with my mother and her condition that keeps is a long term heartbreak. And that's related to my new things. I guess I would just say, you know, just you just have to keep the faith, and it really helps to have a few people to talk to about it. And so I have a few writer friends that know the landscape of this, of the ups and downs of it, the difficulties of it. But I think also at some point, if you've worked and worked and worked and worked on something, there comes a time when it is time to let it go. And I think that is something that's hard for some people to do. And I don't mean before it's ready, you know, but before it's ripe. But at some point, I think that holding on to something and not releasing it or finishing it in the world and letting it go into the world, and you have no more control over it after that, we all know that, is it's a kind of freedom. So, and if you don't ever do that, you're never going to get to the next thing that you're going to write. And I know that temptation to hang it on. I don't want anyone to see this, because then the book that you think you could have written or will yet, if you keep on, is always going to be perfect, see? But the one that you actually end up with never is, because it's made of words. It's not made of ideas and dreams and hopes. It's made of these black marks on a page. So I think if we could just be a little easy on ourselves and say, you know, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be made up of these dream clouds I had for it. it's going to be what it is. And I will give my best effort to it. And then I'm going to just let it go. Bye. So that I can, move on to the next thing. But,
So Rebecca,
yeah.
oh, sorry, go on, Anna.
And can you say if you're working on something new now for our participant?
Well, again, a lot of several of the ones that I've been working on have been working on me in the last 7 years. See, the New York book was finished about 6 years ago. And so, and then, it took time to find the right publisher. And then it took 3 years from the time it was accepted before it got out in the world. And then because of pandemic, we delayed it even more. So I was already deep into these other writings, and several of them are in the Kenyon Review. One is, they're what I call care grieving essays, and they're really about the experience of helping to care for my parents. And there's one that's on the Kenyon Review online. I think it's still there. Kirsten might know, but called Mail, M-A-I-L, about getting mail, all this mail that I keep getting from after my father died, that he gets more mail than I do. He's been gone 4.5 years now, and I'm still getting his mail. So there's those pieces, and there's one that was actually published in the Kenyon Review as a poem called Sacrament. And it's about kind of washing my father's feet. And so these are the ones I'm working on. They're very different from what I've done before. They're brief for most of them, but again, just like the New York book, some of them are quite long. But most of them are brief, and they're almost like little plays. They're very on scene. And I think that's because during those years of helping to care for them, it was in some ways, I'm not saying they were like children, but in some ways it was that kind of timing, like you're always on call. So you're rushing and you don't really have the time to sit down and work through the long writing days. So they were like these brief little vignettes, little plays of things that happened. That's what I'm working on now. And so looking at how they maybe they'll talk to each other, and we'll form a book. I hope so. I don't know yet. And my mother is still alive. So that's the thing about memoir. I say that in the author's note at the beginning of the New York book, memoir interrupts the life and the life interrupts the memoir. And that there's never a time when you can say, okay, it's time to start now and I'm going to write about it, because meanwhile, life moves on. The people you're writing about change. You change, events happen in the middle. So I have not written about the pandemic at all. I don't tend to write about things for the reader, for public, until I've really had time to reflect on them a lot, even though I might put them in my journal. So we'll see what happens. If it might, certainly will find its way in, I think, too. We'll see.
But you have managed to do a number of readings during the pandemic, and I know this is sort of a final one in a series around this book. I know we have a lot of authors in the audience, either current authors or authors in the future. So lots of people who do readings or will do readings one day. So my question to you is, how do you select passages from your work that you will read at a reading? What is your process in preparing?
I try to think about the audience first, if it's a library where people are coming and none of them really are writers, but they're hoping to be, or they're just people, not just, but people that are interested in New York, but they are really interested in, any sort of talk about writing. Or so I try to think in terms of, what's going on now with this audience. And, it's just so hard to give a full idea of what a book's about when you're reading, like maybe, I think there were 12 huge double spaced. I don't know if you can see these, but very big print. So it wasn't a lot. It's really hard. I really agonize over it, what I'm going to do. And I time things really, really carefully. So I think I hit it right at the 20 minutes, I think. But, and I practice it and think about what would go next so that people don't get totally lost with it. But it is a genre. Giving a reading is another kind of writing genre. And so I always try to think about my audience and be so grateful to them for being there, because without them, we would have no readings, you know, just like we would have no readers, no books if we didn't have readers to read them. So I don't know. It's something I really think about, and I try not to read always the same thing too many times. I like to pull out and do something new and fresh for me, even though quite often I know there are a lot of poets. I remember I taught with Stanley Plumley, not just in the Kenyon Review, but in the Gettysburg Review conference for several summers. And I know that he began almost every reading with the cancer poem. And I didn't mind that. I kind of liked hearing it again and again. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing to repeat, but sometimes I think if you're doing a lot of readings or talks, it's good to kind of mix it up for yourself, you know.
Our final question comes from Maria, who is in New York City.
Maria Tyrone, I know her work.
And she says, as a lifelong New Yorker, I find it hard to stay very observant about my surroundings, to have the outsider's keen perspective. How did you maintain that power over your 11 years here?
Oh, I guess because I felt just as crazed at the end of the 11 years as I did at the beginning. I'm not sure I evolved too much. Well, I don't know. I think, again, I was keeping track of, not keeping track, but I was noting things as they were happening. And so there was always something new coming around the corner. And actually, the book is not about those 11 years. It's more about the first 6 or so, because things shifted really in a big way about 6 years in or 7 into our time there. And so I just decided that was a whole other time period, whole other experience than and then once I finally understood that music was such an important part of the book, and Leah Purpura, the wonderful writer, helped me see that. I didn't see that in my manuscript. She goes, "Oh, it's everywhere. It's everywhere." And when that helped me get the title, and that helped me I cut 3 or 4 of my favorite essays did not end up in the book because they didn't seem to be, again, talking to the others in ways that I thought were artful as a book. So do not give up, Maria. As my grandmother used to say, be careful what you wish for, right? Some new things could be right around the corner.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you.
Hang in there, persevere.
That's right, persevere.
See you on the other side of Mars.
And thank you, Anna, for helping to moderate and introduce as well. And thank you to the audience for joining us tonight. I will remind you that you can purchase, thank you, perfect, Anna. You can purchase Rebecca's book in our bookshop link, which I'm actually going to awkwardly place into our chat. There it is. And I will ask you to consider joining us for our next reading, which will be on March 25th. It's Ilya Kamitsky and Molly McCulley-Brown, and that will be at 7:00 p.m. And we look forward to seeing you then. Have a wonderful evening.